Welcome back to The Explainer. I'm seriously thrilled you're here today because, honestly, we're going to unpack what is arguably one of humanity's absolute greatest public health triumphs. And look, we're not just going to read off some dry statistics here. No, we're getting into the gritty, boots-on-the-ground reality of how this actually went down. So get ready, because today's Explainer is basically a literal epidemiological thriller. We're going to explore exactly how a terrifying ancient scourge was finally cornered and defeated by just a few fearless individuals armed with nothing but science, strategy, and just sheer willpower. Okay, let's dive right into this. Hundreds of millions. I want you to just let the sheer, horrific weight of that number sink in for a second. Because before we zoom into the specific mystery of our story today, we really have to understand the adversary we're up against here. Throughout human history, smallpox wasn't just a disease, it was an absolute monster. It didn't just cause illness, it disfigured, it blinded, and it killed hundreds of millions of people across centuries. It was this relentless force of nature that just seemed utterly unstoppable, literally tearing through empires and continents with devastating efficiency.
Which brings us to Section 1, the last bastion.
So by the early 1970s, these aggressive vaccination campaigns had actually miraculously swept the virus from most of the globe. But the virus wasn't dead yet. In 1973, it made its final, most formidable stand in Bangladesh. And guys, we are looking at the anatomy of a true public health nightmare here. You've got massive populations living in incredibly remote, yet densely packed rural areas, the infrastructure terrible. Travel, logistics, communication, they were nearly impossible. And on top of all that, the nation is in the grip of extreme poverty and ongoing political turmoil following a brutal war for independence. Public health officials were absolutely terrified. And why? Well, because this exact environment was the perfect storm. They were terrified that the sheer chaos of post-war Bangladesh would allow this disease to remain a permanent, untouchable reservoir, just quietly building strength and ready to spill right back out into the unprotected world at any moment.
This forces a massive pivot, leading us to Section 2, a radical new strategy.
As you'll see, the sheer chaos of that environment meant the old playbook was just completely failing. Visionary leaders at the WHO realized, hey, we have to make a desperate, massive pivot if we're going to win this. Mass vaccination, the traditional method of trying to systematically vaccinate absolutely everyone, it just wasn't working fast enough amidst all that post-war turmoil. Millions of people were constantly on the move, and the virus, it was always one step ahead. So they completely changed their approach. They executed this highly targeted tactical strike known as surveillance containment.
Now, I really want you to focus on this for a second, because this concept is the silver bullet that finally broke the back of the epidemic. Surveillance containment basically meant that instead of trying to blindly vaccinate the entire country, teams had to actively hunt down every single active case of smallpox. And once they found a case, they would ring-fence the outbreak. This meant rushing in and vaccinating every single person within a very tight radius around the infected individual. It's like they were effectively creating an impenetrable wall of immunity before the virus could even move and spread further into the population.
Breaking that transmission chain required some fierce urgency across 4 totally non-negotiable steps. 1. You find the active case. 2. Isolate the sick individual immediately. 3. Vaccinate everyone in that tight ring. And 4. Disinfect the homes. Look, this wasn't just a casual medical visit, it was a full-blown emergency response. Every single link in the transmission chain had to be snapped instantly. If a field worker hesitated even for a second, if they missed a single contact, or if, say, someone slipped out of the village in the middle of the night, the virus would escape the ring and the whole nightmare would literally start all over again.
But, okay, let's just pause for a second here. Think about what we just discussed. How do you actually do that? How do you track an invisible killer, an active virus, in a chaotic, impoverished country of millions of people where basic roads barely even exist? Sure, it sounds great in a sanitized medical textbook, but executing this on the ground, in the mud and the rain, it seems entirely impossible.
And that brings us to Section 3, hunting a ghost. This is where the real heroes of our story step in.
To actually turn that abstract theory into gritty reality, epidemiologists like Arao Kojima, who was this fiercely dedicated Japanese doctor who volunteered for the WHO's intensified smallpox eradication program, alongside his local Bangladeshi counterparts, they basically lived a life of exhausting daily danger. We're talking about walking for miles and miles through deep, muddy rice paddies under a scorching sun. We're talking about crossing dangerously swollen rivers right in the dead middle of monsoon season, and sleeping in these rudimentary huts with literally zero amenities. But honestly, the severe physical toll was only half the battle. They were operating in a culture that was fundamentally terrified of government quarantine.
Smallpox victims were very often just hidden away by their families out of deep social shame and fear. So before Kojima could even deploy a single vaccine, he had to painstakingly, patiently win the trust of deeply terrified villagers.
And because these victims were hidden away, finding the virus became a literal detective hunt. Kojima was out there tracking shadows. He couldn't just, wait for sick people to come to a modern hospital clinic. He had to go out into the unknown and find them himself. He would be interviewing market vendors who maybe heard about someone coughing 2 towns over. He'd question school teachers about abruptly missing students. He'd sit down, drink tea, and consult respectfully with the village elders. The guy spent his days chasing faint rumors of a scarred child or a sudden fever, following these tiny, fragile clues from village to village until he finally located the exact household harboring the virus, and only then the ring vaccination would begin. But man, the work was intensely dangerous. Every single time Kojima and his team stepped into a home to isolate a patient, they were risking contracting the lethal virus themselves.
But all that grueling work paid off, leading to Section 4, the final victory.
Let's move to this timeline and see how this builds, because it was exactly this persistence, this humility, and this totally unwavering field discipline that finally turned the tide. The momentum they created in Bangladesh quite literally changed the course of the world. So, in 1973, we saw that final, terrifying major stand in Bangladesh where Sajima and hundreds of local health workers finally broke the back of the epidemic. By employing that exact surveillance containment strategy, they cornered the virus globally. Just 4 years later, in 1977, the very last naturally occurring case of smallpox in the entire world was diagnosed in Somalia. And then came the monumental milestone. In 1980, the World Health Organization officially declared global eradication.
Let this fact give you absolute goosebumps for a second. Smallpox remains the only human infectious disease ever completely wiped off the face of the earth through deliberate science and coordinated public health action. In the entire history of our species, with all the countless illnesses that have plagued us, this is the single time we have hunted a human disease down to absolute extinction. It is a historical triumph of just unimaginable magnitude.
History books very often celebrate the politicians, the high-level directors, and the grand abstract strategies. But as we've seen in our explainer today, the true victory belongs to the quiet, fearless field operatives. People like Arao Kojima, who walked into the darkest, most remote, and most dangerous corners of the world, armed with nothing but a needle, a notebook, and an unshakable refusal to let people suffer.
It just proves that ground-level human determination really is the ultimate weapon against global catastrophe. Which leaves us with this final thought for today. If one dedicated person with a notebook and a needle can literally change the course of human history, what modern ghost should we be hunting today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I will see you right back here next time as we break down another incredible topic.